One of the greatest military opportunities in American history was wasted. A Union general held his enemy's secret battle plans. He knew exactly where the Confederate army was. He had the advantage every commander dreams of. Yet days later, America witnessed the bloodiest single day in its history. How do you lose when you already know your enemy's next move? September 1862. The Civil War had already claimed thousands of lives when Confederate General Robert E. Lee launched his boldest gamble yet, invading Maryland after his victory at the Second Battle of Bull Run. He hoped to carry the war into the North, gather supplies, influence Northern politics, and convince Britain and France to recognize the Confederacy. But history took an unexpected turn. Union soldiers discovered Lee's secret battle plans wrapped around 3 cigars, revealing exactly where his divided army was located. Suddenly, Union Commander George B. McClellan held an extraordinary advantage, one that should have changed the course of the war. Instead, it led both armies toward a quiet Maryland creek called Antietam, where a single day of unimaginable bloodshed would change the nation forever. Chapter 1. The General Who Knew Too Much. Lee's invasion was already becoming risky. His army had been divided across Maryland to capture key objectives, including Harper's Ferry. Confederate detachments were spread across miles of unfamiliar territory, leaving Lee's forces separated at the very moment speed and coordination mattered most. If the Union moved quickly, the Confederates could be defeated one by one before they had any chance to reunite. Then fortune intervened in one of the most remarkable accidents of the Civil War. When McClellan received Lee's lost orders, his officers could hardly believe their luck. Wrapped around 3 cigars and discovered by Union soldiers at an abandoned campsite, Special Order Number 191 revealed exactly how Lee had divided his army and where each portion was expected to move. Rarely in military history had a commander gained such complete knowledge of an enemy's intentions. The road to victory appeared open. For many Union officers, this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. Lee's divided army was exposed, and a swift offensive could overwhelm isolated Confederate forces before they reunited. It was the kind of advantage generals dream about, and one that could have ended Lee's invasion almost before it truly began. But McClellan had a reputation. Although admired for rebuilding the Army of the Potomac into a disciplined fighting force, he was also known for caution. Time and again, he believed Confederate armies were far larger than they actually were. Even with Lee's plans in hand, he feared the intelligence might be incomplete, or worse, part of a carefully laid trap. He consistently overestimated Confederate strength and feared walking into a trap. Instead of launching an immediate, all-out attack, he advanced methodically, carefully organizing his army as it moved westward through Maryland. His deliberate pace reflected a commander determined to avoid disaster, but it also surrendered the one advantage the Union possessed: time. Instead of striking immediately, he moved cautiously. Every passing hour gave Lee another chance to survive. As reports reached Confederate headquarters, Lee quickly realized the danger closing in around him. Union forces had already broken through at South Mountain, and scattered Confederate units were racing to reunite before they could be destroyed separately. As Union forces advanced, Lee realized danger was closing in from multiple directions. He abandoned his scattered positions and searched for ground where he could make a stand. He found it near a small Maryland town called Sharpsburg. The location offered exactly what Lee needed. Rolling ridges overlooked open farmland, providing artillery with wide fields of fire, while woods, fences, and gentle rises in the landscape offered cover for infantry. Most importantly, Antietam Creek formed a natural defensive barrier between his army and the advancing Union forces. There, Antietam Creek curved through the countryside like a natural fortress. The water was deep, the crossings were limited, the terrain favored defense. 3 stone bridges and only a handful of practical fords forced any Union attack into predictable approaches. Lee understood that a smaller army could use the landscape to offset its numerical disadvantage. If his men could hold long enough, the terrain itself might become another weapon. On September 15th, Lee positioned his army behind the creek and waited. His soldiers were exhausted from days of marching and fighting, but there was little time to recover. Throughout September 16th, Confederate reinforcements arrived from Harper's Ferry while Union troops gathered on the opposite bank. That afternoon, Major General Joseph Hooker's 1st Corps crossed Antietam Creek and clashed with Confederate defenders near the East Woods. As darkness settled over the fields, the gunfire faded, but both armies understood that the real battle had yet to begin. 2 days later, the fate of the campaign would be decided, but dawn had not yet arrived, and both armies were moving toward a battlefield neither would ever forget. Chapter 2: The Cornfield of Death. Before sunrise on September 17th, Union troops crossed Antietam Creek and pushed toward Lee's left flank. A heavy mist clung to the fields as thousands of blue-coated soldiers advanced through the darkness. They moved in disciplined ranks toward Confederate positions, unaware that within a few hours, this quiet stretch of farmland would become the deadliest place in America. The first major clash erupted near a simple farmer's cornfield. Owned by David R. Miller, the 24-acre field stood tall with late summer corn. Only hours earlier, it had been an ordinary farm. Before the morning was over, it would become one of the most infamous landscapes in American military history. Within minutes, the field became a nightmare. The first volleys shattered the silence. Muskets cracked in rapid succession as artillery shells ripped through the towering corn. Thick black powder smoke rolled across the field, swallowing fences, trees, and entire formations until the battlefield became almost unrecognizable. Thousands of soldiers fired into smoke so thick they could barely see their targets. Many fought by instinct rather than sight. They aimed at muzzle flashes, shouted voices, or movement in the haze, often without knowing whether they had struck an enemy or simply fired into the smoke. Every step forward carried the risk of walking directly into unseen gunfire. Lines advanced, driven by shouted commands and the determination to break Lee's left flank. Union brigades pushed through the shattered corn, convinced that one more assault might finally crack the Confederate defense. Lines collapsed. Concentrated rifle and artillery fire tore through entire formations. Officers fell beside the men they led, while survivors struggled to maintain order amid the deafening roar of battle. Wounded soldiers lay between the lines as the fighting swept past them without pause. Then they advanced again. Fresh regiments replaced shattered ones almost as quickly as they withdrew. Neither side was willing to surrender the ground, and every new assault was answered by an equally determined counterattack. The fighting surged back and forth across Miller's cornfield with relentless violence. Control of the field changed hands repeatedly. Union troops forced their way forward, only to be driven back moments later by Confederate resistance. Then the cycle began again. Every exchange claimed more lives. Yet neither army gained the decisive breakthrough both desperately sought. Union General Joseph Hooker later described cornstalks cut down as cleanly as if they had been sliced by a knife. The description was no exaggeration. Endless volleys shredded the standing corn until little remained upright. By mid-morning, the once green field had become a landscape of broken stalks, churned earth, abandoned equipment, and unimaginable destruction. The dead lay where they had stood only moments before. Entire companies were reduced to a fraction of their original strength within minutes. Survivors stepped over fallen comrades, unable to stop for the wounded because the battle showed no mercy to those who hesitated. Yet despite suffering terrible losses, Confederate forces under Stonewall Jackson refused to break. Jackson understood that every minute his line held bought Lee precious time to strengthen the rest of his defenses. Again and again, he rushed fresh brigades into the fight as exhausted units reached the point of collapse. His soldiers endured staggering losses, but they denied the Union the quick victory it had hoped to achieve. Nearby, around the Dunker Church and the West Woods, fresh troops rushed into combat. The small white Dunker Church soon disappeared behind drifting smoke and constant gunfire. Confederate reinforcements arrived just as Union formations pressed forward, while additional Federal troops entered the struggle hoping to turn local success into a decisive breakthrough. Entire regiments disappeared in the smoke. Visibility often dropped so low that commanders lost contact with neighboring units. Some formations advanced too far, while others unknowingly exposed their flanks. Soldiers emerged from the haze only to find enemy troops standing a few yards away, turning the battle into a deadly contest fought at terrifyingly close range. Officers struggled to maintain control. Orders were nearly impossible to hear above the roar of muskets and cannon. Battle flags became the only reliable guide through the smoke, and when color bearers fell, confusion spread even faster across the battlefield. The battlefield had become chaos. For hours, Union and Confederate soldiers collided across the cornfield, the East Woods, the West Woods, and the grounds surrounding the Dunker Church. Every attack was answered. Every gain was contested. Every passing minute added hundreds more names to the growing casualty lists while buying Lee the time he desperately needed. When the smoke finally began to lift, neither army had broken the other. The morning had consumed thousands of lives, yet the battle was far from decided. For hours, neither side could gain a decisive advantage. And as thousands fell in the northern sector, an even deadlier struggle was beginning at the center of Lee's line. Some historical details and first-hand accounts vary among sources. This documentary is based on widely accepted historical research and the broad scholarly consensus. Chapter 3, Bloody Lane. The focus of the battle shifted southward. As the savage fighting around the cornfield and Dunker Church began to lose momentum, commanders on both sides looked toward the center of the battlefield. The morning had already claimed thousands of lives, yet neither army had gained the decisive breakthrough. The battle's outcome now rested on a single stretch of ground. At the center of the Confederate position lay a worn farm road that years of wagon traffic had carved below ground level. Decades of rain and passing wagons had worn the dirt road several feet beneath the surrounding fields. What had once been an ordinary country lane had become a naturally protected position, giving Confederate infantry the kind of defensive trench soldiers would rely on in later wars. It looked ordinary. To a traveler before the war, it would have seemed like nothing more than a quiet farm road winding through the Maryland countryside. There was little to suggest this forgotten lane was about to become one of the Civil War's most infamous landmarks. It would soon become infamous. Confederate soldiers packed into the road and used its sunken walls as a natural trench. Sheltered behind the embankments, they loaded and fired their muskets while exposing very little of themselves. Any Union force crossing the open fields would have to advance directly into a storm of rifle fire with almost no protection. Wave after wave of Union troops attacked. Brigades marched forward through artillery fire before closing the distance with the Confederate line. Each assault carried the same objective: to break the center of Lee's army before he could recover from the brutal fighting that had already devastated his left flank. Each assault meant devastating fire. The defenders unleashed volley after volley at close range. Smoke drifted across the fields as tightly packed Union formations struggled to maintain their momentum under relentless musket fire. Some regiments reached the edge of the road only to be driven back with terrible losses. Men fell by the hundreds. Officers waved swords and shouted commands, trying to keep formations together as casualties mounted around them. Stretcher bearers risked their own lives to reach the wounded, but many soldiers remained trapped between the lines as the battle surged over them. Still, the attacks continued. Union commanders understood that this was more than another assault. If Lee's center collapsed, his entire defensive line could unravel. Fresh regiments moved forward one after another, determined to achieve what the earlier attacks had not. Eventually, Union soldiers found a weak point. As casualties mounted and units shifted under constant pressure, part of the Confederate line became exposed. Union officers recognized the opening almost immediately. It was the opportunity they had been fighting for all morning. They poured fire into the exposed flank of the Confederate defenders. Caught between attacks from the front and deadly rifle fire from the side, many Confederate soldiers suddenly found their strongest position becoming their greatest vulnerability. The road that had protected them now restricted their movement and limited their escape. Suddenly, the road that had protected Southern troops became a trap. Some defenders fought to the last possible moment, while others scrambled to withdraw before they were completely surrounded. The struggle reached a level of violence that stunned even battle-hardened veterans who believed they had already witnessed the worst the war could offer. Bodies piled so densely that witnesses struggled to describe the scene. The lane filled with fallen soldiers from both armies. Rifles, torn flags, broken equipment, and discarded knapsacks lay scattered across the ground. Survivors later recalled climbing over the dead and wounded simply to continue advancing, leaving behind one of the most haunting images of the Civil War. After the battle, the position would be remembered by a new name: Bloody Lane. For a brief moment, The Confederate center appeared close to collapse. Lee's army stood in genuine danger. A determined Union advance through the gap could have split the Army of Northern Virginia in two, isolating its wings and turning a hard-fought battle into a devastating Confederate defeat. The opening was there. The chance to split Lee's army in two had arrived. For a few critical moments, victory seemed within the Union's grasp. But battlefields are often decided as much by hesitation as by courage. Confusion, exhaustion, and the lack of coordinated follow-up allowed precious time to slip away. Confederate officers rallied scattered units, formed a new defensive line, and sealed the breach before Union forces could exploit it. But the opportunity slipped away. McClellan failed to fully exploit the breakthrough. Still convinced Lee might possess unseen reserves, McClellan chose caution over commitment. Rather than risk his remaining forces, he held them back. That decision gave Lee exactly what he needed most: time to recover from the brink of disaster. Lee's line bent, but did not break. And on the southern end of the battlefield, a final crisis was about to unfold. Chapter 4: Burnside's Bridge. Hours had already passed. The battle had raged since dawn, leaving nearly every corner of the battlefield scarred by relentless combat. Smoke drifted over shattered fields, artillery still thundered in the distance, and exhausted soldiers struggled to hold their lines. After everything that had happened, the outcome was still uncertain. Thousands were dead or wounded. The ground between the opposing armies was strewn with broken weapons, abandoned equipment, and fallen soldiers. Many of the wounded had spent hours where they fell, calling for help that often could not reach them until the fighting eased. Still, the battle was not over. On the Confederate right, a small group of Southern defenders held a narrow stone bridge crossing Antietam Creek. The bridge was one of the few practical crossings over the creek, making it a vital objective for the Union. Steep banks, rocky slopes, and high ground overlooking the crossing gave the Confederate defenders a powerful natural advantage despite being heavily outnumbered. Union General Ambrose Burnside had overwhelming numbers. His 9th Corps outnumbered the defenders many times over. On paper, the Union had every advantage needed to force a crossing and turn Lee's vulnerable right flank. Yet the terrain favored the defenders. Confederate riflemen, positioned high above the bridge, could fire directly into every advancing Union formation. The narrow crossing prevented Burnside from bringing his full strength to bear, forcing repeated attacks through a deadly bottleneck. For hours, Confederate sharpshooters turned every crossing attempt into a disaster. Again and again, Union soldiers charged toward the bridge, only to be met by disciplined volleys from the heights above. Smoke blanketed the crossing as officers struggled to reorganize shattered regiments for yet another assault. The bridge became a killing zone. Every failed attack came at a terrible cost, but the Union could not simply abandon the crossing. Without it, Lee's right flank remained secure, and the battle would continue slipping away. Finally, after repeated assaults, Union forces captured the crossing and pushed forward. Once across Antietam Creek, Burnside's men climbed the western bank and advanced toward Sharpsburg. For the first time that afternoon, Lee's right flank appeared dangerously exposed, and a decisive Union victory suddenly seemed possible. At last, Lee's army seemed vulnerable. Burnside's advance threatened to roll up the Confederate right flank and end the battle. If the Union could maintain its momentum, Lee's exhausted army might finally collapse. After surviving the savage fighting at the cornfield and Bloody Lane, the Army of Northern Virginia now faced its greatest crisis of the day. Then came the twist. Just when Confederate defeat appeared possible, Major General A.P. Hill arrived from Harper's Ferry. Only days earlier, Hill's division had helped secure the Confederate victory at Harper's Ferry. Now, responding to Lee's urgent call, his men marched at remarkable speed toward the sound of battle, knowing every passing minute increased the danger facing the Confederate army. His men had marched roughly 17 miles in a desperate race against time. Covered in dust and exhausted from the forced march, they reached the battlefield with little time to recover. Yet there was no pause for rest. The fate of Lee's army depended on what they did next. Without pause, they entered the fight. Hill's division slammed into Burnside's exposed left flank with unexpected force. Union soldiers who moments earlier believed victory was within reach suddenly found themselves facing fresh Confederate troops. The exhausted Confederates slammed into Burnside's advancing troops and drove them back. The momentum of the Union attack vanished almost instantly. Burnside's men, already worn down by hours of combat and difficult terrain, were forced into a fighting withdrawal toward the bridge they had sacrificed so much to capture. Lee's army had survived. As darkness fell, neither side had achieved total victory. The gunfire gradually faded, replaced by the cries of the wounded scattered across the battlefield. Soldiers searched for missing comrades, gathered the injured, and waited through the night, uncertain whether the battle would begin again at sunrise. But the cost was staggering. More than 22,000 men had become casualties in roughly 12 hours of fighting. More than 3,600 were killed, while thousands of others were wounded or missing. No other single day in American military history has claimed so many casualties. It remains the bloodiest single day in American military history. Field hospitals overflowed. Churches, barns, homes, and any available shelter became makeshift hospitals. Every building filled with wounded men as doctors struggled to treat an endless stream of casualties arriving from the battlefield. Surgeons worked without rest, operating with limited supplies and under unimaginable pressure. Medical teams continued through the night, doing everything possible to save lives despite overwhelming conditions. Among those helping the wounded was Clara Barton, later known as the Angel of the Battlefield. Ignoring the danger around her, Barton delivered desperately needed food, water, bandages, and medical supplies directly to the front. Her courage at Antietam helped establish the reputation that would later lead her to found the American Red Cross. Throughout September 18th, Lee remained in position while quietly evacuating his wounded. Although his army had suffered enormous losses, Lee maintained the appearance of readiness, hoping to discourage another Union attack. McClellan, still convinced the Confederates might possess greater strength than they actually did, chose not to renew the battle. Then, realizing no major Union attack was coming, he withdrew across the Potomac River into Virginia. Lee's retreat ended his first invasion of the North. His army had escaped destruction, but the Maryland campaign had failed to achieve the political and military results he had hoped for. The invasion of the North had failed, but the battle's greatest impact was still ahead. President Abraham Lincoln had waited for a significant military success before announcing a policy that would fundamentally redefine the purpose of the war. Antietam, despite its indecisive battlefield result, provided the opportunity he had been seeking. 5 days later, President Abraham Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. The war was no longer only about preserving the Union. It was now directly linked to ending slavery. Lincoln declared that enslaved people in states still in rebellion on January 1, 1863, would be declared free. The conflict had become not only a struggle to preserve the nation, but also a fight that challenged the institution of slavery itself. That decision transformed the conflict. Britain and France, both strongly opposed to slavery, became far less likely to support the Confederacy. Any government considering recognition of the Confederacy now faced the prospect of appearing to support a nation fighting to preserve slavery. One of Lee's greatest hopes for foreign intervention steadily faded. A single day of fighting had altered the course of the war, and it would also end a career. Antietam had given McClellan the opportunity he had long wanted. Yet once again, caution outweighed aggression. Instead of destroying Lee's battered army during its retreat, he allowed it to escape across the Potomac. Frustrated by McClellan's refusal to aggressively pursue Lee after the battle, Lincoln removed him from command weeks later. The man who had possessed Lee's plans had failed to deliver the decisive victory the president wanted. Closing reflection. Antietam reveals one of history's most uncomfortable truths. A battle does not need a clear winner to change the world. Thousands of ordinary people paid the price for decisions made by a handful of leaders. Farmers, laborers, immigrants, craftsmen, and volunteers marched into battle believing they were serving a cause greater than themselves. Many never returned home. Others survived with wounds, both visible and invisible, that would shape the rest of their lives. Behind every casualty was a family forever changed by a decision made far from the front lines. Some leaders acted boldly, others hesitated. Yet every choice, whether driven by courage or caution, carried consequences measured in human lives. The effects of Antietam reached far beyond the fields of Sharpsburg. What ended as a tactical stalemate became a strategic turning point that reshaped the Civil War, strengthened the Union's political position, and opened the door for the Emancipation Proclamation. It also reminded the world that history is not always transformed by overwhelming victories. Sometimes it changes because a single decision is made, or because another is not. The bloodshed at Antietam reminds us that moments of uncertainty can become turning points, and that history is often changed not only by victories, but by opportunities seized or lost. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Mode Hub Tales as we uncover the forgotten histories, hidden cultures, and untold stories that shaped our world. Because history doesn't disappear, it waits to be remembered.